Happy hump day, everybody. Welcome back to Mets Daily. I'm your host, Jake Brown, at Jake Brown Live. Follow me on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, X, and scan this code to become a Mets Daily Insider member, just $5 a month for extra off-season shows. Appreciate the support. Smash that thumbs up on this video right now. It helps us so much. Click that thumbs up and hit subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Well, the Red Sox beat the Yankees. That's the joy we take. The Dodgers beat the Reds last night, and we start to think of ourselves, would the Mets have stood a chance against the Dodgers? Do we feel better that the Dodgers beat the Reds pretty easily? Or, does that make us feel worse? I would think it makes you feel better. The fact that Hunter Green got rocked and the Mets really didn't have anyone to that level in terms of an ace pitcher when maybe they could have, and we'll talk about that in a second. But do you feel better or worse now that the Dodgers won game one and probably are going to win tonight and make it 2-0? Well, the Mets make some roster moves. Jose Siri, Dickie Lovelady, and Kevin Herget have elected free agency after they were outrighted by the Mets, and I think this puts a smile on your face. You feel bad for the guys. They're human beings, but, Jose Siri, obviously, the lead name on this list, he wasn't good. He had 061, very limited time, 2 for 36. He did nothing after last year where, he hit homers for the Rays, but that was pretty much it. This is a guy who has struggled to make contact for a lot of his career. 187 last year, 222 the year before, with an on-base of 267 and 255. Now, his 25 homers in 2023 and 18 homers last year are what intrigued the Mets, along with his speed and defense. But he came here, did nothing early, then he was out for a majority of the season, came back, and looked very rusty and, just not a good career for Jose Siri in a Mets uniform. Dickie Lovelady, I think the best part of Dickie Lovelady was the name, Dickie Lovelady. I mean, the name was just so ridiculous. And I said on here, if you've watched me all season when they signed him, I said they should sign him. And not just because of his name, but because he was dominating the minor league level. And, once he was out there and available and the Mets needed an arm, I said, why not pick him up? Well, he didn't work out. Only 10 innings in a Mets uniform, 7 earned runs, an ERA of 6.3. So he didn't work out. And Kevin Herget was actually fine in a Mets uniform. He was a guy that shuffled up and down. 12 innings, a 3 ERA, gave up just 4 earned runs. But reality is he's probably a 4A pitcher. Didn't really do anything prior. Very limited sample size in the big league. So those guys are gone. And I think the Mets can breathe a little bit knowing that Jose Siri is not going to be part of this team in 2026. And the Mets got to figure out center field, whether it's Cody Bellinger, Trent Grisham on the free agent market, or do they keep it internal and go with Carson Bender, Jet Williams? I think a lot of fans would be excited by that, but they're not surefire bets here in the big leagues. You'd be taking a risk. So you'd have to really fill out other positions. That stuff we'll get into throughout the offseason. I don't want to dive every day here into which free agents. I mean, it's going to get old. We still have playoff baseball. It's only October 1st. So we'll each day we'll try and pick out a free agent and go through a bunch of names that would make sense for the Mets, but it's still so early. So, but those are some names to monitor. Center field, something you got to think about. Now, Jose Siri gone. Tyrone Taylor, he's under contract. He's arbitration eligible. Do you bring him back as a backup? I don't think you could go into next season with Tyrone Taylor as your starting center field. I think we all love Tyrone Taylor. He's not a starting player in Major League Baseball. Well, one guy is a starting player and a starting pitcher, and a really damn good one is Garrett Crochet. And you saw last night, you saw Aaron Boone in the Carlos Mendoza class, them two, no wonder why they work together, pulling Max Fried in the 7th inning, allowing Weaver to blow it, and the Yankees losing, where Alex Cora, a championship-winning manager, leaving his ace, Garrett Crochet, in, 2 outs in the 8th, finally pulled him. Chapman, 4-out save. Crochet going 117 pitches. Like, that's what you want to see your ace. It's the playoffs. What are you holding Max Fried for? He said he was gassed, but he said he could give whatever it took. Yankees just managed that so poorly. Playoffs, you have to push them to the limit. Your season could end tonight, and a big reason is because you were foolish with how you used the bullpen. Fried should have went through the 7th, and then you go to the bullpen. That really hurt the Yankees in what was a 1-0 game. Then it became 2-1, and that was it. Red Sox tack on insurance run, 3-1. Yankees bases loaded in the 9th. They can't even score. Very Metsian-like. It's like the Yankees and Mets doing very similar things with a Mets manager that worked under the Yankee manager. But the real story, Garrett Crochet. And should the Mets have made the trade for Garrett Crochet? The reported offer would have started with Jet Williams, Brandon Sproat, and more. Likely 2 more prospects. Looking back on it, now when this first came out, I was like, no way you should do it. Looking back on it, I would say this was foolish that the Mets didn't do it. When I talked about Garrett Crochet before the season, when this happened, I didn't think he was proven enough. He had the stuff. He's a good pitcher, but the longevity wasn't there. But he went out and really shut me up and had an unbelievable season. I mean, now that you think about that deal, you say, holy crap, I would have done that. I mean, that would have been the innings eater, the horse that you wanted in your rotation. And what did Garrett Crochet go out and do? 18-5 with a 2.59 ERA, 255 strikeouts, over 205 and a third innings. You want to talk about a pitcher the Mets badly could have used, that's him. Now, why I said he didn't have the track record, he only had 1 year. His only year as a starting pitcher was last year with the White Sox. Literally, he had 1 year as a starting pitcher, 32 starts. He made 32 starts again, and man, did he dominate. And maybe the Red Sox saw it coming. They gave him an extension. And even when you look at the extension, it's not a bad deal. Getting the 6 years, $170 million, that looks genius at this point. Think about it. The Mets gave Sean Manaea 3 for $75. Garrett Crochet is going to make 25 next year, 28.8, 28.8, 28.8, 28.8, then a potential player opt-out after 2030. That would have looked really good as a Met. And that's the kind of arm you're looking for. That's, there's not really that guy out there. You could say Framber Valdez, but he had a down year, had some issues, cross up with the catcher. You look back on this, guys, and you let me know in the comments below. Do you make that trade for Garrett Crochet? Because now that I look back on it, I say, hell yes. I mean, Jet Williams might pan out. They haven't called him up yet. Brandon Sproat could be the odd man out if you still decide to trade him. If you say, hey, we're going to keep, obviously, Nolan McLean, and then we trust Jonah Tong to eventually be the guy. Eventually, probably one of these starters gets traded. Maybe not. But that would have been the move to make. Jet, Sproat, and potentially maybe it would have taken a Wenninger. Maybe before they traded Baez, maybe it would have been Baez too. But now, now it looks incredibly dumb that the Mets didn't take Crochet. And, man, he would have looked good in orange and blue. With the numbers he had, they make that move and get Crochet. There's no doubt in my mind the Mets are in the playoffs and maybe going on a run and maybe have a shot against the Dodgers, because then you're throwing Crochet in game one and you feel a lot better than the Mets in their piggybacks or Nolan McLean. Imagine Crochet game one, McLean game two. You're talking about a Mets team that can go on a run even with all the issues that they had. So, unfortunately, they didn't do it. Hindsight's 20/20, I guess. The Red Sox ended up with him, and now the Red Sox are one win away from moving on to the ALDS. As we talk about this Mets depressing season here on Mets Daily, I said I wanted to look back at the brutal losses. We're going to do it today. We're going to look back on what should have been the losses, the one of them, and the Mets end up in the playoffs. Let's go through it. Deep breath. Here we go. Let's take a look. Starting back on April 27th against the Nationals. Remember that game? I remember it well. I was on live on TikTok. The Mets were up 8-7. The Mets were up 7-1 against the Nationals in the seventh inning. Jose Butto gives up homers. Ryan Stanek has to come in because they, I believe, had used Diaz back-to-back, or maybe they didn't want to use him back-to-back. I forget the exact scenario. But Stanek came in to save it, and he did not. He blew it. And a 7-1 lead in the seventh off a gem by Tyler McGill became an 8-7 loss by the Mets. I believe they pulled McGill. Guys were on, and then Butto imploded. Butto, Stanek, both guys you just could not trust this season. That was a brutal April loss. Then June, we remember it well. It's actually the 13th. I put the 12th, but it's June 13th, Friday the 13th. June 12th is when the Mets, I believe, had finished a 7-game win streak, and then they would begin their downward spiral in a losing streak that we all remember on Friday the 13th. Up 5-1 in the 6th, and they bring in Paul Blackburn, makes his first ever relief appearance, complained after the game. It was a role he wasn't used to. Well, he sure wasn't. He imploded in the 6th. Mets, blow a 5-1 lead, and that was the start of their first 7-game losing streak. It wasn't, there would be more. There would be 2 more 7+ game losing streaks. If you could believe it, there were. That was the start of the first one. On that losing streak, June 17th at the Braves, the Mets 5-1. So a couple of mistakes, you guys. It's the offseason. Give me a break today. Mets lose 6-5 in the 10th. They were up 4-1. They lost 6-5. 4-1 lead in the 8th after the Peterson gem. Garrett blew it. Alvarez, I'll always remember this, made the dumb throw to second instead of throwing it to the advanced base to third, allowed the runner to move up, and then a base hit would seal it. I mean, just a brutal mistake by Alvarez. Called for the splitter. Wish he didn't. It was in the dirt. He threw to second instead of third. The runner moved up. You'll never forget that. But that was the game. Peterson had a gem. They ended up pulling him. And then Reed Garrett, I'd be good if he's not in the Mets next year. I know he's cheap. I'd be good if he's gone. Remember that game well. Then August 4th against the Guardians. This one will always live in my head. The Mets lose 7-6 and 10. Mike Sarbaugh not sending Tyrone Taylor home in the 9th. I did a full breakdown of it. Carlos Santana dropping the cutoff. He easily would have scored if he was sent. Sarbaugh, who's probably getting fired any day now as part of the Mets coaching staff changes. I hope he does. I'll never forgive him for this. Baseball 101. You send Tyrone Taylor home. He was already rounding third before the cutoff man got it. Once the cutoff man dropped it, he already should have been sent. The game's over. There's another win the Mets have that they'd be in the playoffs today. Just less than a week later, remember this one, Mets blow a 5-run lead. Their second 7-game losing streak of the season, and there would be a third if you believe it. They lose 7-6. Manaea implodes, and the Mets lose a game they had a 5-run lead in. September 20th against the Nationals, another one you remember well. Bases loaded, 1 out in the 9th. Mets lose 5-3 in the 11th. Bases loaded for Nimmo. He strikes out. Marte gets out. And then Lyle with the 2-run inside the park homer on a play that Cedric Mullins, of course, misplayed. And that was a disaster. The other honorable mentions, July 28th against the Padres. Mets had a 5-1 lead in the 5th in San Diego. They blow that. Ronnie Mauricio ties it in the 9th. But then, of course, the Mets defensive blunders in the 9th. Gregory Soto makes a bad throw, and then Elias Diaz wins the game with a single. They lose that. 9-11 against the Phillies. Remember the 4-run first inning, and the Mets got no hit the rest of the game, getting swept by the Phillies, and that's when you knew officially the division was over. And then most recently, that Friday against the Marlins where Brandon Sproat did not get help from Pete Alonso, and the Mets defense absolutely faltering and blowing a 2-0 lead that quickly evaporated. And, they win that game. That's the most recent one. And, again, they're going to the playoffs. So all those games we look back on and we say to ourselves, holy crap, what the hell happened to this team? And unfortunately, we're sitting here today watching the Reds likely get smoked again by the Dodgers. Thanks for watching Mets Daily, everyone. I'm Jake Brown, at Jake Brown Live. Smash that thumbs up, hit that subscribe, and scan this QR code and become a Mets Daily Insider for just $5 a month. Appreciate the support. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Happy October.